I'm trying to look at leadership in the African context because we've been talking about the Ghanaian context and how things are happening. But our first Prime Minister said that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it's linked up with the total liberation of Africa. So as we look at leadership and emerging leadership in Ghana, we must always place it in the context of Africa. But also, we must place it even in the global context because we live in the global world. And what happens here will have ramifications elsewhere. And our people that we're educating here will be working elsewhere. We have people that have worked through the United Nations system all the way up to become Secretary General, even though they were educated in Infansipum here in Ghana. So we need to look at things beyond Ghana. Sadly, our political leaders tend to compare between political dispensations within Ghana. And so it's very difficult to measure the speed of progress that we are making, or even if the ambitions are strong and compelling enough. At the time of our independence in Ghana, we gained independence almost around the same time with Malaysia and Singapore. And Ghana was ahead economically of when you compare the three nations. Today, Ghana's GDP per capita, which is if you take the GDP, the gross domestic product, and share it among the Ghanaian population, each person will have $2,000, $2,200 in Ghana. In Malaysia, it is around $7,000. In Singapore, it is around $11,500. We all started around the same time. We were ahead of the pack, and then all of a sudden, our capital is so low. Now, it is when we start comparing outside of the political dispensations within our system that we know how far back we are. And when you know how far back you are, it determines the speed and the momentum you need to push forward. Otherwise, we'll be complacent and continue to say we're doing very well. Africa has had very wonderful political leadership from the start. If we're looking at the freedom fighters, like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, and Nelson Mandela of South Africa. These are transformative leaders. They had very little resources and yet fought the system that was oppressing us politically and economically, and with little in their hands, they still won the independence for us. That kind of transformative leadership is what our emerging leaders must aspire to be. And I'll try and look at a definition of leadership in the classical sense, and how that in itself is a problem to how our emerging leaders are being groomed. If you take any basic leadership textbook, you will find leadership defined as guiding, directing, and inspiring others towards a shared objective. This is a classical definition. You find it everywhere. But the problem with the definition is that it did not state what the objective should be, good or bad. Even if it's a bad objective, as long as you can guide, direct, and inspire others towards it, is leadership. I don't think that's the kind of leadership that our emerging leaders must be groomed to. Secondly, it creates the impression that to be a leader, you must have followers, so that without anybody following, you can be a leader. But there are trailblazers with no followers. They think through, they determine, and they look at themselves and say, though no one is doing it and nobody is coming along, this is the path that I will tread. And they trailblaze. That kind of leadership is what will change our African continent. It is what will change our businesses. It is what will change our educational system. It is what will change our communities and our ministries. So I offer a different kind of definition so I can place the discussion in context. I define leadership as proactively addressing complex challenges and making crucial decisions that impact the well-being that positively impacts the well-being of a community, nation, or the entire continent. Proactively. You need not have followers. You need not let someone tell you to go forward. You have to find and identify this is a challenge that must be solved. Like our forebearers, the freedom fighters, Kwame Nkrumah, Nyerere, they saw it as a challenge that must be won. Whether or not, and sometimes the path is very lonely. Sometimes you'll be left alone. Sometimes there'll be nobody to even inspire you anymore. But as long as you have identified and you have a passion for it, then your leadership prowess will come. Some time back, and I'll just say this shortly, I was traveling back from Europe, and usually I would not watch movies on the flight because I normally pack my work because I have 7 hours or 8 hours, so I make sure that I pack my work, charge my my laptop, and then as soon as I get on, do some work, be productive before I go down. But that day, I was so tired, and I said, let me watch a movie. And I watched a particular movie. The title of the movie is Just Mercy. Just Mercy. Justice, Just Mercy. And there was this young guy who had completed Harvard University Law School and came up and said, I need to fight for those that are facing injustice within the American legal system and those that have been condemned to be killed. And when he started, he had a lot of challenges. The guy's name is Brian Stevens. He had a lot of challenges. Even the people he was fighting for didn't believe in him because he was too young. You just came out of school. How can you come and fight? The big lawyers fought, and they ended us up in jail, and we are on the road to be killed. How can you, young person, come up and say, I'll fight for you? So even the people didn't believe. Initially, his friends believed in him, but at some point, they just thought, it's too hard to fight this. It's too hard to go this way, so let's stop it. So they stopped it, and he was on alone fighting. Some of the judges were even against him. Some of the lawyers were against him. They ganged up the police and everything. But in the end, long story short, because he had that vision and he had that dream to fight for those that have been unlawfully convicted to be killed, he managed at least to get one of them released from prison. But this is the problem. This is the issue. At the end of the movie, he said something which I found very profound and has actually influenced the way I look at leadership, the way I do things myself. He said, you cannot go around this world with good ideas in your head. That alone will not work. He said, you need conviction. Are you with me? You need conviction. Something must compel you beyond just a good idea. Sometimes when you look through how our leadership in Africa is trending, we'll find a lot of good ideas. And recently we've seen a lot of good ideas from all shades of political parties, both here outside. But sometimes you wonder whether there is conviction behind it. Sometimes you wonder if that alone will take us there. There are a few areas that our emerging leaders must seek to develop along. First is personal leadership. Your personal leadership. You must lead yourself first before thinking about breaking into other arenas. This involves the individual's ability to lead themselves, cultivate self-awareness, and develop the necessary skills, knowledge, and character to positively influence others. Then we have our political leaders. This involves the capacity to lead the community and the political arena. Then we have global leaders like the United Nations, the World Bank, and so on. And fortunately, we have some Africans making strides. They started young as us, but they had that vision ahead, and they desperately wanted to be part of the global leadership. And we have, for example, Ngozi Okonjo of Nigeria, who currently serves as the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and Ahmed Mohamed, a Kenyan diplomat who has also held positions at the United Nations. Then we have organizational leaders, we have civil leaders, and so on and so forth. Now, why it is said that Africa's problem is a leadership problem, and everybody, all the literature will continue to say that it's because of poor leadership. What are the main issues when you look through what people have said and read? Some believe that our leadership problem stems from our colonial past. The colonial system undermined our indigenous leadership structures and governance system, as traditional forms of authority were often suppressed or co-opted by the colonial administration. So some feel that if we had allowed our traditional system to develop and flourish and modernize, it will probably be a better form of political arrangement and political leadership that will take us forward, rather than grafting it into the political or the Western style political arrangement. It's an argument that we can have. But when the second thing is we have very weak institutions and lack of infrastructure. When President Barack Obama visited Ghana in 2009, he said, Africa doesn't need strong men. It needs strong institutions. Our institutions are weak. People are able to flout the laws willy-nilly because they know that the institutions that have been set up to regulate and control them are so weak they can just bypass them. We're talking about Galamsey in Ghana, but it's also elsewhere in other African countries, and it's almost the same pattern replicating, because it is not that Galamsey has to be banned, and we can have that debate. Galamsey is already illegal. So it has already been banned. But the thing is still happening because of weak institutions. Institutions are set up to do what they have to do, but will not continue to do it because they're weak. And so Barack Obama is very right as one of the leadership problems we have. And we expect that emerging leaders will fight for strong institutions, empower the police, empower the forces, empower the legal system, let the judiciary work. Some of our emerging leaders must get into the legal system, become judges, become senior lawyers, move forward so that our institutions will be strengthened. Otherwise, we will continue to lament. It will always feature in manifestos. We will see it in all documents, but the problem will never move. If at one point, leaders rose to remove colonial administration with all their guns and their barrels and everything, how come that Galamsey is beating us here in Ghana and elsewhere in the African continent? Because of weak institutions. Now we've heard about, which I will gloss over quickly, the question of corruption and nepotism. It's also a weak point in our leadership system. Now, if we are grooming emerging leaders and we are not imbibing in our emerging leaders right from school in the curricula, trustworthiness as a trait, trustworthiness as part of the learning system, that students are not even examined on integrity issues. Students are not assessed on trustworthiness principles. In the past, I think in the olden past, we had a course called civic education, which teaches us these trustworthiness principles and is examinable. But now it's left free flow, and we can study our sciences, we can study our STEM, we can study everything. But listen, and this is crucial for leadership. Warren Buffett, one of the world's millionaire, I think he's second, third, or fourth, I don't know, but is one of the top guys. He says, when he's recruiting employees, he will always look out for three things. But the first is integrity. Your certificate will not state your degree of integrity. But he says the first he looks out for is integrity. The second is intelligence. And the third is your passion or energy. But this is what he said. He said, if you can't find the number one, integrity, don't recruit. Because somebody who is very intelligent and passionate without integrity will collapse your company overnight. The guy is intelligent. The guy can beat your computer system. The guy can beat your program, your accounting system, everything. And so if we grooming leaders, that would take us to the next step, and we bypass the key element of integrity and ethical decision making in the whole system, there's something wrong that ought to be corrected. There's something that is improper. That when people get into positions, whether in Kenya, and we saw what happened in Kenya recently, whether it's in Ghana, wherever it is, people get into positions, and the first thing that is checked out is in ethical decision making. Once they're there, decision making is about self-enrichment, getting things that will make them happy, and so on and so forth. We need to go back to our curricula and ensure that our educational system builds, even the mission school or faith-based schools, sometimes even don't treat integrity as a core subject. And we come out with all our technical knowledge, but when it comes to leadership, then we have a problem. And imagine that you have a lot of people that have no integrity in leadership, regardless of what it is. You cannot rule, or you cannot lead with only good ideas. You need integrity and you need conviction. Another problem with African leadership is political instability and conflict everywhere. Everywhere. Every little thing is some political thing. We know of our neighbors that about 4 countries, coup d'etats rolling everywhere, cascading, and everybody is afraid that it may even inflict other neighboring countries. There's going to be a copycat attitude. If you have political instability, and we are lucky in Ghana because our economy or our political system has been very stable for a while, and we thank God for that. But if you have systems that are disrupted every single time, there cannot be long-term planning. Leadership is about long-term planning. Are you with me? And I need to make this distinction, so probably I will see if I can wind down. Leadership is about long-term planning. It is different from management, and it is different from administration. Leadership is about transformative change, positive change moving forward. So leadership looks far beyond now. Management is about resource allocation, allocating resources, assigning tasks, and administration is about order, ensuring that the policies are implemented, the forms are filled, everything. You need all three in a system. But we're talking about leadership. We need transformative change makers, people that will go beyond day-to-day activities, but see the big picture, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. What sort of nation do we want to build? Do we want to become like Malaysia? Do we want to become like Singapore? That is leadership for me. Rather than saying in 20XXX we did this, and 20YYY they also did this, and that is better than us, or it's not. We are church. That is inward looking. That is not leadership. We live in a global world. And we should think globally and see what is happening in China and see what is happening in Singapore and see how come that Chinese students are manufacturing and coming out with different types of phones and changing the world. That how come that they have TikTok that is even scaring America? How can we change our educational system? That is leadership. If we stop and groom our leaders to think beyond resource allocation today, think beyond budgeting today, think beyond all the simple system that takes us daily, but can imagine a Ghana, an Africa that is comparable to Europe, and begin to walk the walk and walk the path to that place, we will be there. And our emerging leaders will take charge. And young leaders, it is your time. As Daniel said, it is your time. It is for us to think as leaders. Move away from management. Management is okay, but move away. See yourself in 15 years' time, wherever you are seated. What will become of you? What will you become? What's going to happen? And what will be your impact? Remember that I have defined leadership as taking on the challenge proactively for the betterment of people, communities, nations, and even the continent. We hope that through this conference and through all the things that we have shared, we will have the likes of Dangote in this room. We will have the likes of Joseph Siao Ejiofor of Zoom Lion from this gathering. We will have people who will come up and take. I mean, when Zoom Lion, and I can talk about Zoom Lion, because when he started, I do remember it was the councils that were collecting the waste bin, and we were swallowed. People don't remember. We were swamped by rubbish every street ever in Accra. One person moved from just allocating resources in his office and said, I will change this. It is possible. And he tells his own story. And he said he went to China and saw how it's done there and immediately brought in the Aboboyas. And look at him, one man, transform everything. Today, on his payroll, there are over 60,000 employees, one man. May you be the next Zoom Lion. And it will take a lot of doing. It will take a lot of hard work. But have a compelling vision. Have a compelling vision, a vision that goes beyond you, a vision that goes beyond your family, a vision that goes beyond today, a vision that looks at Malaysia and say, we have to become like Malaysia. We have to become like Singapore in the next 15 years. That our GDP per capita should be 11,500. And not talk about just comparing with dispensations that have gone past and coming. Let's move. That's what the youth are for. And I remember when I was watching the Kenyan situation, it took the youth of the system to bring the political order to order. They had to stop and they had to listen because the youth have the power. Africa, 40% of our population are within the youth bracket. That's where energy resides. That's where innovation resides. That's where power resides. That's where risk-taking resides. If we cannot do well for our emerging leaders, we'll have a long way to go as Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's do it once again for him, please. Thank you.